So we are very privileged to have Eric Jackson and Richard Lenchenko here today to present to us.
Yeah, I see my wife and son are standing outside. So this is my wife over here too. She's the CEO of our company. Most of the people that know me in this room would automatically say, if Eric's going to start a company, it's going to fail miserably because he is not a CEO. And so, but luckily, I had an ace in the hole that nobody knew about, and that was my wife, who is an incredible administrator. I'll just say that because she has to deal with me, and she knows me really well. So I'll make that introduction as well. She said she could give this presentation today, and I was pretty excited about that. And then I kind of said, no, let me do the science part. Further down in the future, you can do all the presentations. And so really, it's a privilege to be here. So as I kind of move forward, I think are my slides on the back end of this, so I can just keep going, Megan. So Megan will always take care of you. I learned that too very quickly when I came on board here. And I actually had a slide that I had to dig out of my archives just so I could pay tribute to that with Megan. So as I get started today, it's great to be back on the campus. It's crazy to see. We were trying to take our kids to go see The Lion King at the Gym Theater. That's one of the most special things that we do with our kids here was be able to walk to the Gym Theater when we had a little apartment for General Mills, and we'd stay there and we'd walk down and see movies. And so we wanted to wait and go see The Lion King when we were here. And so we came into town and we couldn't get to the Gym Theater because we came in the back way because I was trying to convince my wife, I want to take the same road that I traveled whenever we lived in Concord to get here. And so we got off, we went all these other roads, and we kind of get to the back end. And I didn't even know when we were driving in on the new road that's starting to widen up that we were even at the right place. I'm trying to convince my wife, we're in the wrong place. And she goes, no, it's straight ahead. I said, no, it's over here to the left. And of course, she was right. But the reality was we got on the campus and I'm like, look, they're building the new Duke building. And I found out it was a baseball stadium. Right? So sorry, Duke. Seriously. So today I'm just going to take this chance to share just my career in a nutshell, and hopefully what you guys will glean out of that is that everybody sitting in this room has a responsibility that's becoming, I would say, more dire as we go every year into the future. Richard and I, as we were driving here, we were just noticing all the buildup in and around this area. It's just people and people and people. And I get around people all the time, and you have the naysayers that say, well, there's plenty of food on the planet, right? And everybody is going to be able to eat. And they say, well, we're not quite at 9 billion people yet. So once we get to 9 billion people, it's either going to get really expensive or it's going to get really scarce. And if it gets really scarce, it will be really expensive. And so then it even becomes more of a tragedy because then only the people who can afford it will get it. And I don't want that world to exist. And so you guys sitting in here, especially the students, you're the future. And so what I want, hopefully, you guys to get out of this today, and you'll see through Richard, is you have the power to change the world. I really don't anymore. I'm getting pretty old. My energy is starting to wane. You have a lot more energy than I have. But hopefully you can take some tidbits out of what I will share with you on this little story or journey that I've been on, that I'll say I've had the privilege to be on because it's been a wild ride. I started with the USDA in 2004. Immediately when I got to the USDA from the University of Arkansas, I was going to start working on oat. I had previously worked on soybean. Soybean is a diploid crop, a lot of genomic resources. I moved into the world of oat, which is a polyploid crop. It not only has one genome, it has 3 genomes. It is very complex, and there was absolutely no genomic resources. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I don't even really know anything about oat, so I better go find out where oat came from. So luckily, there was a guy named Rick Jellin, who is now the dean of the Department of Life Sciences at BYU, who is the foremost expert on oat. And he was just living right down the road from Aberdeen, Idaho, which is in southeast Idaho, for those of you who don't know. Living right down the road in Provo, Utah. So I got him to come up, and I said, okay, Rick, tell me all about oat. And he's like, what do you want to know? Where did it come from? Nobody knows. Okay, you're an expert, and you don't know. So I guess that's a bad thing, right? Came to pass that everybody's still trying to search out where the ancestry of oat really came from. But what he did do is he said, hey, what are some of your big ideas? I was like, I don't know. I've got some really quirky ones that I'll share with you because I'm not really afraid to share quirky ideas. So I shared one of these ideas about using just some biological stress and variation to domesticate crops. And so he said, hey, you really need to look at this oat that I have. So I'll pause the story right there. So in 2006, as I'm working with USDA at the National Small Grains Germplasm Repository, that's where they store all the small grains from all over the world. So just a tidbit of information for those that you might not know in this room. So all of our major row crops, and I wouldn't call oat a major row crop, I'll call it an orphan row crop, they don't come from the United States. So Thomas Jefferson, if you would have looked after the Revolutionary War, not too long after the Revolutionary War, he was not even in the country. He was out in Africa and different places seeking out germplasm resources to bring back to the country. And he was writing these memoirs down, and he was writing back of his exploration. He was going to places in different parts of Africa where he was finding parts of rice that he was bringing back because the pestilence that was occurring in rice in places like Georgia and South Carolina were destroying the crop. Okay? So you're a colonist, you came to the United States, you don't really know how to do all the crops that are there, but you know where you came from, and so you're trying to figure this out, so you better go get genomic resources. And what he said in his memoirs was that he noticed that the new varieties or the new strains that were coming over were impacting the level of pestilence that was occurring in rice. And so he was looking for other strains, and he was bringing this back. And one of the things that he buried in his memoirs was that he was trying to convince the U.S. government, the U.S. instituted government at the time, to teach the kids the value, teach in the education system the value of genomic resources. It wasn't until several years later that Abraham Lincoln picked up on that and instituted in the 1890 school the collection of germplasm from all over the world, leaning on Thomas Jefferson. So he sent out plant pioneers all over the world to collect resources in wheat, in barley, oat, and maize, and soybean, to bring them back here and curate them in these large germplasm repositories. I had the privilege to work in one. So in 2006, the alert came up on the radar for the U.S. government, as well as CIPHER down in Mexico, and in CARTA in Syria, and in Canada, that there was a new race of stem rust in wheat. Stem rust disease in wheat will eradicate wheat. It will kill off all the wheat. It will annihilate the yield, and you will have nothing to eat if that is your staple crop. And for those that you don't know, wheat has been a staple crop in a lot of the world for a very long time. Specifically in India and places outside of India. If the wheat ran out or it was killed, thousands and thousands of people will starve. In Uganda in 1999, a new race of the stem rust emerged that was wiping out all the resistance that existed on the planet. CIPHER, the CARTA, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Canadian Repository System, the AAFC, the Germans, everybody from all over the world descended on Kenya starting in 2006 to build a stem rust nursery to screen all the wheat material that they could muster to find resistance, because the fear in the epidemiologists and the epidemiology studies that were being done was once it crossed through Ethiopia, made its way through Mesopotamia and down into India, there would be hundreds of thousands of people that would die. And it was a major deal. So I don't know what happened in this case, but somebody thought it'd be a great idea for a young scientist, me one, to screen the entire U.S. germplasm repository for partial resistance to UG99, a race that cannot come to the United States, and there are thousands upon thousands of accessions in the United States germplasm collection. So what did I do? I don't know. I went back to my office and thought, well, this is going to be fun. Idaho, on top of that, has no humidity. You don't get disease in Idaho. That's why they put the collection there. So now I'm in a place where you can't get disease, I can't get the race into the country, what am I going to do? I can't take 10,000, 15,000 accessions to Kenya once a year and screen them. So what I thought about doing was I thought, well, I can build these very large modular homes. I came from Arkansas. That's where I got my graduate degree, right? So I knew how to build a trailer park. And so that's what I did. I went out, I bought all the lumber from the local Aberdeen lumber store, because Aberdeen's a really small place. It's a town of like 2,400 people. So I bought all the lumber. I had them order a bunch more in. I bought all the lumber again, and I built these greenhouse structures in the field, and I systematically planted all the individuals in hill plots and screen them with a composite, multiple races, so I could build a model, a prediction model, to tell me what I need to take to Kenya to train so I could rapidly figure out like which ones would have some partial resistance that we could use against this disease. If I would have tried to screen all 10, 15,000 of those, it would have taken me forever. We didn't have forever. The models were saying 2.5 to 3 years. How do you create a resistant variety that quickly? You model it, you put it out, and you find it. We found 6 sources of partial resistance that are being used today. But it wasn't just me, right? This was a crazy idea that went on for almost 8 years, that created all kinds of knowledge that led to all kinds of resistance genes, not only in wheat, but also in oat and in barley. Everybody started adopting it. I learned the power of predictive analytics. I learned how to do it, and I learned how quickly you could scale when you needed to. But I also learned about an incredibly beautiful people in Kenya. And it was really a hard thing to learn for me. Because up to this point, my dad always taught me that you are what you make yourself to be. When you'd see people that didn't have what you had or were struggling, my dad would always say, you know what? They had the same opportunity. They failed. We didn't. We worked hard. And my parents worked really, really hard. We didn't have a lot, but they worked hard to get what they had, and that's what he learned. What I learned in Kenya was there was a whole lot of hardworking people that didn't have that either. So I had a problem. I had a crisis. You see the 2 kids that are on the upper left-hand slide, they're cousins. The only difference between the 2 cousins is one family had a goat, the other one didn't. Protein starvation 101. Dwarfism occurs when you don't have the right type of protein in your diet. Brain development doesn't happen the way it should if you don't have the right fatty acids. It wasn't because they didn't work hard. It's because their starting line was in a different place. Their starting line was in a different place. How wrong was it for me to think that they just didn't work hard enough? That was my impression of the world. Then I got out in the world and I realized, you know what? It's not right. That's an incorrect hypothesis, Dad. We've had lots of interesting conversations since then. So I thought, what can I do about this? And the answer was what Rick Jellin, the professor at BYU, brought to me. 60%, over 60% of all the caloric energy, the food energy in the world comes from cereal grains. 60%. This is a slide showing the makeup of those grains. You got the whole grain, you got the light blue that's the starch, you got the gray that's the protein, you got the yellow that's the fat, and then you got some total dietary fiber, right? The macronutrient makeup of the grains that we deal with that provide over 60% of the food energy of the world are mostly just regular gasoline. A lot of junk, right? Well, that oat that Rick brought to me, it's Moroccan oat. Andalusian is some people that were through southern Spain into Morocco. And we could talk about that story in another time. But Andalusian oat, or Moroccan oat, was made up of 26% protein. Higher fat content and more beneficial fat content. This was my answer. It came 4 years prior to what I was what I had seen, and I was starting to work on it, but losing faith that I could get this thing to where it needed to be. Why? Because this is what it looked like. It wasn't domesticated. It was Avena magna, not Avena sativa. And it was all that nutrient composition that was desperately needed was locked inside that hairy little thing where the plants would grow. They wouldn't set seed for months on end. They would fall over, they would shed their seeds, and their seed was designed to actually fall into the cracks and fissures in nature that occur in these areas that are highly droughted, and the hairs would stick into that little thing, and when it would rain, it would auger itself down into the ground. It would lay dormant for lots of years, so it wouldn't all germinate at the same time, and it would shoot up. Great to survive in nature, right? Pathetic if you're trying to feed yourself with it and combine it, right? So all I had to do was simple. I just had to make it not so hairy, not so awny, those big little antennas stick out. I had to take away all the stuff that my kids would say are the cool things because it floats around on the table when you add water to it. I had to make it so it didn't stand up so high, that it would actually flower within 3 months. That was pretty simple, right? not a big task, right? So how do you do it, right? You just dig into the literature, right? Ken Fry, farm kid, Michigan, professor at Iowa State, what I believe to be one of the greatest minds in quantitative genetics. A lot of his peers thought he was a little crazy. Buried in one of his papers, I read and scoured all of his literature. Buried in one of his papers, this paper in 1987, he made the observation that nutrient stress, that water stress caused heritable genetic change in barley over just 5 generations. I was like, dude, like I only have about 5 genes that I have to correct or find mutations in to turn that hairy little thing into something that could be grown and combined. What if you just apply what he is seeing, what he is saying to the world in a rapid way and select on it very quickly? It could be possible. Dig a little further back in history. Go back to the Incans and Mayans in the Altiplano. What were they doing? This is an outdoor laboratory high in the Altiplanos where the Incans and Mayans were working on domestication of crops. Taking teosinte and things like potato that were diploids, and they would move it up and down these 1-meter terraces, which would incrementally give a change in environment that would cause stress within the crop, and they would get rapid change that they could then displace out in all their areas where they were moving out into. Genius, right? It was genius, right? Buried in the literature, what I learned is the power of text mining, right? The power of text mining. How long does it take you guys? Every time you write if you're writing a dissertation, you're writing a thesis, the first thing you have to do is what? A literature review. Why? You got to text mine to build a hypothesis that makes sense, and then you go test the hypotheses. This was my hypothesis. Now I just had to test it, right? So I did. I took a bunch of the hairy seed. I induced it into biological stressed environments. I then would bag every head. We'd go out late in the winter. We'd harvest it in the snow in Idaho. We'd bring it back in. We would hand dehole every seed. And then we'd find ones that had a little bit less hair that would come out of the grain a little bit easier. The little holes that come around a little bit easier. That would stand up a little bit or be a little bit shorter. They wouldn't fall over and would set their seed a little bit earlier. And we cycled that over and over again. That's just how it works. There's no substitute sometimes for hard work, right? Somebody asked me, could you do it again? And all the tricks that you learned, how did you find those ones? I was like, it's quite easy, right? How did the banks teach people how to identify counterfeit? They would handle a lot of real bills, right? So when they got a counterfeit, they knew it. So I always tell people, I said, if you handle a lot of really wild hairy seed or you're around a lot of wild hairy plants that fall over, you recognize when one's not right. So I learned that selection really wasn't that difficult. You just got to deal with a lot of things, right? Big data, right, in a way. And so you go through this process, but I also realized when you get the foundational materials, you were going to need a different strategy to get to the end of the road quicker, right? So I started thinking in my head, I was thinking, okay, if it takes me 8 years to get to the point where I have foundational lines, and I'm still going to need another 21 years or more to create a variety, then I'm thinking, gosh, I started doing the math and thinking, I'm going to be really, really old or dead. But bigger, I was thinking of all the kids who are starving or are having struggles in their life with maybe protein starvation that won't make it. So that caused me to have a stress point to think about how do you get around this, right? So what I did know is I was trained at the University of Arkansas in SAS, right? Because it was grassroots when I was in graduate school. I don't want to date myself. SAS is no longer grassroots. It's R and Python now, right? They were grassroots. They were in the school. They were helping teach. And what we did at the University of Arkansas is we did a 2-year stint in graduate school of actually learning how to SAS code, doing all your proc codes and all this stuff. And then they introduced this nice little tool called Jump that John Saul. And they tell the story of John Saul, one of the founders of SAS. And at first you want to kill your instructor. Mine was Dr. Moustakas, a Greek, so it wouldn't have hurt if I killed him, right? First you want to kill him, and then you're like, oh, this is a really nifty tool, right? And so what I did at the point is I said, okay, I'm going to need these predictive analytics. I'm going to need like to put all this together. So what I really need to do is get an audience with John Saul. So I'm like young into my career here, and I think I'm just going to go talk to John Saul, right? What's inhibiting me from talking to John Saul? Well, he's a pretty well-known guy, and he owns a big company, and he's worth like $4 billion. That might be one problem. But I thought, what does he really want? If I could negotiate a site-wide license for all the USDA to have jump, then he'll talk to me. So that's what I did. Because I had influence in the USDA now. So I used that, because they all needed jump anyway, right? So I used that to get them to go to get the site license jump. That went through, and I was sitting in John Saul's office, sharing this story with him, this exact story, early on. And I said, I just need to go work with your people to do this. They were starting Jump Genomics at the time. He said, okay, I love this story. I love your purpose. Go work with Russ Wolfinger, who like wrote the textbook and the general linearized model. Go work with him and do this. I was like, sweet. So I spent the next over a decade of my life working with really cool people at Jump, and namely Russ Wolfinger, to go through this process. So then, as the years went by and we get down to year 2011, these foundational lines are now done. I had another problem. I had a supply chain problem. The USDA didn't believe in it. They didn't see the value in it. I couldn't convince them of it. And so how was I going to get this to the world? So I made a decision on that day that I would court all the people that I worked with in the oat community, because I had gotten influence with all the millers, to find any company that would have a similar like purpose, and then I would go work with them to get this to the world. Because it's not easy just because you create a technology to get to the world. Sometimes you got to like work even harder to make it get through, right? So I found out that Peter Erickson, as I went on these little interview chains, very much had the same purpose that I was struggling with here. And he started Partners in Food Solutions. So those of you who don't know that, go look it up. It was the one philanthropic organization that Bill Clinton said was one of the most successful he's ever seen. So I linked up with that, moved from Idaho, a lab of like 12 people, $5 million a year in grant funding, turned my back on all of it and went this direction. Why? Because the purpose was more important. I didn't care about that. I cared about the people, but I cared about this, right? So we left there, came here, where I didn't even have a greenhouse, right? But the cool part about being here was there's a lot of cool people. Remember I told you Megan can make like all your dreams come true. So I talked with Marianne and Megan, and we got this greenhouse space, which is in the background of this picture right here. So this is where the last part of that work was being done, the rapid crossing, the selection, the actual free threshing lines that were actually identified came out of the greenhouses right here on this campus. So I never got to tell this story before. You probably never knew what the work was going on in there. We actually put lights in there and had the cops come out and talk to Ryan and I because they thought we were growing like marijuana, which I guess that'd be almost legal today, right? I know you guys probably thought we were crazy, but you know, when we planted them out the first time, we didn't get into flower because we didn't have the right photo period. And we're like, oh yeah, we bred that into the crop. We're selected in the crop, so I guess we have to worry about that now. So anyway, we went through that whole process, and it was there. We successfully got it there, and then the cool part about the whole story is, even though it was there, I'm living in General Mills world, we had a gentleman's agreement. You can own the IP to the developed world, I just get to take it to the developing world. That's what we did with Peter. Get there, I go to Cheerios, I'm sitting in a meeting with Cheerios, and we have this really cool oat. It's going to cost a lot more. We watched this oat go from no acres to 1 acre to 30 acres to 350 acres. That's a pretty cool experience, right? It's incredibly surreal. We did all this, and the Cheerios team is like, it's going to cost me 7 cents more a box. Don't want it. So we're in this room. I'm doing all this. I'm doing these like knowledge base, these discovery things. I'm learning how I can use a machine to tell me what to put into Yoplait to make Yoplait have 20% less sugar and yet taste the same. And this is my purpose. The Cheerios team says it's going to cost more than 7 cents. We're going to help you. But we want your predictive analytics. We want your machine learning. You're lucky. to tell us how to make Cheerios cheaper. So I packed up my bags in the middle of this meeting. We still have another hour in the meeting. I think I learned this from Nick. I pack up my bags in the middle of this meeting with the vice president of Cheerios. And he goes, well, what are you doing? We need your help. And I said, well, I think we've come to an agreement. You can't help me, so I can't help you. I don't have any positions at General Mills. I just moved my family to Minneapolis, right? He's totally ticked off. So what did I do? I walked straight to my boss's office. Go grab my pink slip, right? Figured that was it. You just don't do that in corporate America, but I didn't really care, right? That wasn't my purpose. So I walked down to my boss's office. I get chewed out for 30 minutes. And then I just looked at him and said, hey, I need to go to Australia. He's like, did you listen to a word I said? I said, yeah, you said this, 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 and that. What is wrong with you? I said, you know, Tom, I've got to make somebody like the baby, right? The baby's ugly. I got to find somebody to like the baby. At all costs, when it's your purpose, you do it, right? So he said, this is it. You get one trip down to Australia to convince Uncle Toby's, who makes oatmeal, to buy into this. And if they don't, you're done with it. You'll do whatever I ask. I was like, risk? No problem. I'm thinking on the plane on the way to Australia, you know, you fly overnight, and I don't think I slept at all. Why? Because Uncle Toby's oatmeal, every box says, made with oats from Australia. This was not going to get grown in Australia. It was super new, and it was going to cost more. I thought, man, I just sold my soul to the devil. This is going to be over, and I'm going to be doing what the big machine wants me to do. And if those of you in the room that know me, you know that's not me, right? I get off the plane, and I meet John Pitcher, this little Australian guy. I think he's mostly English, probably, right? He's like, so, mate, what are you down here to do? And I told him, and he said, tell me why you're doing it. And I told him, and he became my best friend. He single-handedly pulled this thing through the machine of Uncle Toby's, which is both Nestle and General Mills, by the way. They decided that they would take 350 acres, 250,000 tons of oat, mill it in Minnesota or St. Ansgar, Iowa, and ship it on a boat down to Australia and do a test market launch to kill it. I left General Mills after this happened because I was kind of done there in the latter part of the story. What I found out later was it performed at 150% of the market. Couldn't kill it, right? But finding somebody that would like the baby, and now the baby's getting better, right? Lesson learned, right? To keep fighting. If it's your purpose, it becomes really easy. But what was really cool about this story was a year before that, Rick Jelen called me, and he said, hey, Wafa Belinabib, let me say her name right, is a professor at the IAV in Morocco, wants higher protein grains for the impoverished people that she's working with in the Middle Atlas, Phosphate Flats, and Upper Atlas Mountains in Morocco. Can we give her the oat? I wrote one email to Jim Kirkwood, who was the CTO at the time, copied Peter Erickson. Before I did that, I sent all the elite breeding materials and all the lines to WAFA. I asked for permission, and I got one line back. Send it. No IP discussion, no anything. Peter kept his end of the bargain. An honorable man, right? Right decision, right? What was cool for me is, just about 3 years ago, we planted the first set in Morocco. My goal was Kenya, Ethiopia, Eastern Africa. The call came from Morocco. The oats from Morocco. Really cool thing to think about, right? We get this call. Peter and Jim and a guy named Bill Miller built an entire philanthropic organization around it with Context Global Development. We put it in Morocco. I'm going to take this trip to Morocco, and I email Wafa Belinabib. Phenomenal. She's like the Mother Teresa of Morocco in my mind. Phenomenal person. I sent her this Google map because there's collection points in this map, and I said right in the center, if you come down right where those two blue roads meet at the top and come straight down to this little white valley, this little crescent in the bottom here. I can show you on this, but I can't show you in both. It's about right there. That would have been where the center of origin of this crop would have been based on all the collection. I took all the Vena Magna, genotyped it all, and then compared the genotypes and the sequencing data to what I had. And it told me that would have been the location. So I said, Wafa, can we go to this location? Like, I'd worked pretty much my entire career on this thing. And she said, God willing, we will go. She rents a 4x4 vehicle, and we're traveling down here, and she turns down this goat road, and we're bouncing up and down on this road. And she finally stops, and she says, we walk from here. We walk into this little valley area, and I am feverishly running around searching for Vena magna. I'm passing over all these little diploid oats, which were truly probably the progenitors of this crop, because it's a tetraploid. I search everywhere for 30 minutes, and I am totally in dismay because I cannot find it anywhere. So I come walking down off of this little hillside, which is in the lower left. I come walking down off this little hillside in this little ravine, and I'm totally depressed, and I look up, and there's Wafa holding 2 clumps of oats. I didn't realize she was a plant pioneer, by the way. She knew where to look. She's holding both, and this was a moment that I think, I tell Richard, you kind of get emotional at 2 points in the story. It's like, this was the moment she was standing there, and I realized I'm passing the baton, right? She's holding both of these oats, and she said, this is Morocco. This is what we have to give to the world. I was just like, take it, right? Take it, right? And the cool part about this story is we've been here for 3 years. That was Richard last December planting this oat. We planted it in 4 locations behind a one-bottom plow. We had some of our guys, Kevin, who's in some of these other pictures, farmer. He couldn't even do the plow. We were doing this in these areas of these impoverished people. They all come out and help. It was such an amazing experience, right? We're planting this oat right now, but little did we know, they weren't going to get another drop of rain. Right? Pretty interesting, right? We didn't realize this was going to be a 100-year drought year. Right? So we're planting this oat, and we go back in June, and I had been at this farm in the Middle Atlas Mountains 3 times with a guy named Rashid. This is his mom. Rashid did not like me. Rashid saw me as a Westerner that he did not like. He wouldn't even talk to me. He didn't know I was there. His mom would never come out. This is on their farm in the Middle Atlas. This year, we walk up to the farm, and she comes out. 100-year drought. Only thing that's growing was this oat. She came out to say thank you. That's the oat. I'm like, this is cool. N of 1. We go up into the High Atlas, same situation. Town matriarch, or patriarch. Only thing that's growing. We go to the phosphate flats. This is the extended family of the sheik, the patriarch, Otta Cutter. I like his name, that's why I want to say it. This is his family out harvesting the oats. His wife came out also, was like in the field pulling these oats. This is how you do it. I asked him, I said, what's the deal here? He said, that's the field that we planted with our most drought-tolerant crop. He said, Eric, nothing else came up. This isn't a huge harvest, but it's quite a bit when you have nothing else. I said, what does this mean, Otta, to your family? He said, it's going to keep my kids at home. Like that's what you're up against, right? We don't understand that life. But this day, you could kind of see I'm a little emotional, right? Because I have little kids too, right? Like she gets to stay at home. If things go bad, they have to go, they will send their kids to Marrakesh to survive. You know what happens when little girls go to Marrakesh to survive? They don't survive, by the way. That's unbearable, right? So that's better than any Nobel Prize you'll ever win, by the way. It's better than any Nobel Prize than you'll ever win. That's the story, the journey that I go. You guys can take that journey. How do you do it? People take that journey, guys. Made in Space. I work closely with Made in Space. What do? They built the first thing off of planet Earth. Talking to Mike Snyder and Jason Dunn, what did they do that was different? They dared to ask the question, what if we didn't need a rocket? They were rocket scientists in NASA. They left NASA, formed a company based on the single question of what if we didn't need a rocket? Radical, right? They said we're going to do things that are meaningful. They said that we were going to innovate disruptively. And they said we're going to start small and go big. They were the first group to print a little wrench on the space station, and now they're printing a communication satellite with little printers in space in orbit. They're going big now, right? It's companies like Pixar. Does anybody in this room know what Pixar is? You ask this question, and you ask, what is Pixar? What was Pixar? And people look at you, and they'll say, well, it's like a movie company, right? Now, Pixar was a computer animation machine built by Ed Cantemel. Pixar asked the question, what if we could tell our animated story even though we can't illustrate? They built a machine to illustrate for them so they could tell the world their story when Disney told them, your story won't work. A bunch of amateurs that thought differently and changed the world. Who runs Disney Animation Studio today? Pixar. Don't ever think your idea can't change the world. Don't ever think you're too young to do something different and change the world. I would argue, don't listen. Do it and find out what happens, right? So that's what we've done, right? We're just sitting in a group of individuals, most of which came out of this organization, and we're asking the question, what if every person could develop new crops? What if every individual on the planet could breed new crops? Because we believe now, from my story going forward, that's what will feed 9 billion people. It won't be a single individual coming from one area of the world. And what's cool about this project, and I'm going to transition here, but what's cool about this project is, if you look at this slide, this is what Kim and I started with. We started with just the two of us in this vision, based on the story we lived, to keep impacting and changing the world. We looked at this and we said, there's a whole crop of individuals that started right here in this PEP project that are highly talented for all the reasons Marianne and Corey shared. They can do hard things. They can work with multiple sets of people. They can take those people and make them better than themselves. And they can work with purpose. So when we started the company, you'd say we were a mastermind, right? I got out of General Mills and I hired everybody from the PEP project. That was not the plan initially. We got out of General Mills and we started building, and all I said was one. I said, if I can just get Richard Lenchenko, we'll be okay. My wife now says he's the guy that'll make all your dreams come true, right? But we also got Scott, and we got Jamie, and we got guys like Armillo, and we put them all together. And I'm going to transition with that to let Richard share some of the stuff that we're doing. And hopefully you take that challenge, guys. Think differently. Ask questions that aren't being asked currently by everybody else, by the status quo.